Welcome everybody. I appreciate everybody joining today. This is curating the final act, and we're lucky to have two speakers. One's Barak Wolff. He's a longtime public health leader in New Mexico, has lots of good expertise and experience to share. And then we also have Mark Ballard, and he's the Director of Advanced Planning for French Funerals. So I want to thank our sponsors. The way we are able to offer these programs for free is because we have great sponsors that help us to do that. AARP, Nusenda, French Funerals have helped, Cumulus Media. And so we really thank all of our sponsors. I want to also introduce Teeners. And if you see Jillian Harris, if you need anything technically while we're on, if you see Teeners in the background, there she is. Jillian can help you out. So just in the chat, you would just chat directly to her and she will see if she can help you. And we really thank Teeners for being on and being a partner. We really appreciate what they do in the world. We think it's a valuable service, and we are very satisfied when we work with them. So, all right, so I invite everybody to use your gallery view and turn on your camera when we're in Q&A and when we're in the community spots, just so we can get to know everybody. So I first want to just do a little bit about New Mexico New. If you don't know who we are, we started in October 2020 during the pandemic, and we are a social profit really on a mission to create an age-friendly world for 50 to 70-plus-year-olds in New Mexico. And we just proactively want to reach out to 50 to 70-year-olds and encourage us to share our wisdom, our experience, and our expertise around nonprofits, small businesses, and startups in the community. So we call affectionately, Tammy calls it affectionately, we call this group New Elders. And so New Mexico New stands for New Elder World. We plan to provide 3 pathways to engage 50 to 70-year-olds. The first one is a pathway for learning events, what we're doing today on learning events like this. The next 2 pathways in the future we will create. One is going to help us connect us to part-time jobs if people want to supplement their income and or volunteer at small businesses, startups, and at nonprofits. And the last pathway is a way for us to connect socially and really be able to combat loneliness and isolation that happens in that community, that can happen. The date of when those other 2 pathways are available will depend on funding, and so and what funding we can raise to build them. So stay tuned. The best way to stay tuned is to go up to our website that's just been put in the chat and join us. Push the join us button and get on our mailing list. That way you'll get updates. So let's get started with today's event. So I first want to introduce Barak Wolff. As I mentioned, he calls himself mostly retired. I love that. I say rewired. He says mostly retired. I love it. So as I said, he's a longtime public health leader in New Mexico, working in rural primary care, EMS, and trauma systems, and as the Director of Public Health Division in the New Mexico Department of Health. Barak has served as an analyst for the Senate Health and Public Affairs Committee for the last 17 years for every legislative session. So thank you for your service. That's a long time, every one of those sessions. For the last 9 years, Barak has been deeply involved with end-of-life issues, and he's on the founding board of directors for the newly created nonprofit End-of-Life Options New Mexico, which is what he's representing today. He's grateful for this opportunity, we are so fortunate to have him join us today and really talk about medical aid in dying and the end-of-life options that are here. So I'll introduce Barak and invite him to share his screen, and we can get him started.
Right, sure, appreciate it. You'll see as I get this going, folks, that I've got a little delay between my camera and my real self and my voice, but the slides work. So that should go okay. I'm working on it. I'm going to replace the camera. I'm going to maybe have to get another computer, but we should be okay. Just try and ignore it. So I'm going to hit this again and then hit this again and see. Yeah, there we go.
Yep, we're seeing your slides.
Right,
There
and
you
then
go.
I'm going to try and go to this. All right, so sort of have front-ended my my little delay, and let's move here. You know, many of you may know this terrific clinician, surgeon, author. Is a contributor to the New Yorker and many other prestigious. He's written a number of excellent books, PBS specials. Atul Gawande talks about life as meaningful because it's a story, and in stories, endings matter. And of course, we deeply believe that endings matter. And I really want to give a full appreciation to NM New, something that was new to me a couple of months ago when I got a call from Tammy and Paula, and then had the opportunity to meet Chip Conley, who spoke last month at this same presentation. And I was very taken with the presentation and really this whole notion of using our time when we're feeling good and we're, you know, sort of at the top of our game in certain ways to begin thinking about what that future is about. And for me, when Chip talked about his near-death experience at age 47, that certainly got his attention, and it certainly gets mine. And it shows us that every day is a blessing. And I'm sure that most of us on the call feel that way. I also love this notion of midlife being 35 to 75 in a state of mind, body, and practice. You know, I'm just, I guess that means as of this past August, I'm sort of moving to my official elderhood and out of midlife, but you know, you hold on to it as you want to and as you can, but it's a good notion. And then the power of ritual that Chip spoke about, you know, and that you want to review your plans periodically so that you can live fully, knowing your values and controlling what you can about what lies ahead in our lives. So today's story, really our agenda for today, I'm going to move very quickly through just reminding ourselves about our mortality and our given, it's our legislative right to self-determination. It's a fundamental right, not only here in New Mexico, but throughout our land. And that leads to advanced care planning. And I think Mark will overlap around that a little bit as well in the next talk. I'm going to briefly go over end-of-life options and then get into the discussion about this new law that we passed last legislative session. The governor signed in April, went into effect in June, and we're living with this new law now, or dying with this new law as the case may be. It authorizes medical aid in dying. I'll give a little update about how things are going so far. But I do want to remind everyone that, again, in this 25, 30 minutes, it's going to go quickly. It's a lot of information, and that really go to our website. We've just revamped it. It's got our new colors and our logos and a lot of good information about everything I'm going to talk about today will be more fully developed on our website. So I always start with reminding ourselves that, you know, we made great progress over the years, starting in 1800, going all the way through the current time. But, you know, that 100% is still right there. You know, we just don't seem to make progress on the fact that, yeah, we all die. So we are mortal beings. As I often say, no one gets out alive. And just as we wish for and work hard towards having that good life, whatever that means for us, we can also seek a good death if we care to. And when I talk about that, I always want to be clear that there's no right or wrong choices about what that will look like. These are choices that are ours to make, and only if we choose to. There's no shoulds here. But when asked, I think it's interesting to note, most people say 70 to 80% want a peaceful and pain-free death at home surrounded by loved ones. And that's what I often see. And I do read the obits. If I were seeing everybody, if I had a big audience, how many of you read the obits? Some do, some don't. But when I see, so-and-so died peacefully at home, surrounded by family and loved ones, it warms my heart. Because for me, that's about as good as it gets. I think that's what I want for myself, at least at this age of 75. We'll see what happens later. But the reality is that only about half of us achieve that kind of ending. Many still die in institutions. Some get, killed on the street. I mean, sudden death is still very much a part of us. Car crashes and overdoses. They don't have these kinds of options, but many still die in institutions, suffering, and often very isolated, and not always having it be the way they want it. So part of what we're about at End of Life Options New Mexico is helping people understand so that they can reduce this disparity between what they say they would like and perhaps what many people end up with. And all of that goes back to the fact that we have this foundation that was created in New Mexico in the mid-1990s through the New Mexico Uniform Healthcare Decisions Act. And we were one of the first states in the country to pass that. All other states have now done something similar. So it is uniform throughout the country. And this gives us the clear right to decide what kind of healthcare we want, where we want to get it, except for the fact that insurance sometimes gets in the way of our free choice, where to start, when to start, and if and when we want to stop treatment. Those are all guaranteed rights. It also gives us the ability to appoint a surrogate or a proxy, or sometimes called a healthcare decision maker or a healthcare power of attorney. Those are all synonymous terms to where we can ask and appoint someone to act in our behalf if we lose capacity. This is a really big deal, and you want to choose wisely. We've done workshops of a couple of hours talking about, well, who should we pick? Should it be a spouse? Should it be the oldest child? Often those may not be the best choices because they have so much at stake in the longevity and keeping their loved ones around. So it's an important decision to make, and it's important to make a good decision, someone who can really represent you when you can't represent yourself. And all of this only gives us the opportunity for the good death, whatever that may be for ourselves. The law is generally on our side if we decide and care to do the work. All of that then becomes the basis for this term of art called advanced care planning. And that's really a process that we really can, and in my judgment, should go through. It's starting as early as we're willing to acknowledge our mortality and think through our values and our priorities, not only about living well, but also about our end-of-life choices and options. Having the conversation then, after we get a bit clear on what we think it is for ourselves, having that conversation with family, loved ones, friends, healthcare providers, advisors, so that others know what we're thinking. And we then get their input and perhaps will modify because of that. It's an iterative process. We also then can put that onto paper. Advanced directive forms are state-based, and ours are available through the University of New Mexico. They're available on AARP. There's a lot of places. If you just Google that, you can get our forms. They're on our website. And they also then allow you to appoint this healthcare decision maker. And as we said at the beginning, we want to revisit these choices as life progresses because things change. They always change. So make it a ritual. So I've been talking about, sort of end-of-life options for thoughtful dying, for those of you that sort of care to go down that road. And, I used that terminology and then about a year ago realized that that's not common language. So let me just take a minute here and go through some of these choices. As I said, sometimes we don't have that choice. Those of us that do have the choice, it's very blessed. Some people die prematurely. They die of trauma. They die of overdose. They die suddenly. Then it's out of their hands. Others will say, I think I'm going to just let nature take its course. I'm kind of stoic in that way. Whatever comes at me, that's probably fine. Another way that we've seen it sometimes in film, today's a good day to die. And perhaps we've learned that in certain indigenous communities, the elders at a point in time will, go onto the iceberg or go out into the wilderness, and the community knows where they're going and that they're not coming back. So letting nature take its course. But for most of us, because of the advances in medicine and science, we're going to pursue life-sustaining treatments. We get a bad diagnosis at a point in time. We get that phone call that we really wish wouldn't have happened. And we're going to find out what our options are for treatment. We're going to pursue that. And some people wish to pursue that right to their dying breath. They want to, as I say there, die with their boots on. And if they want to have that kind of ending, they should, if they can make that happen for themselves. Others have other options. If they've been suffering for a while and someone suggests a new alternative, you have the right to say, no, I really don't want to start that treatment. Also, once you're in treatment and it's not going as well as you would want, or the consequences of the treatment are worse than the disease as you've been experiencing it, you can discontinue that treatment. I've had enough. I'm done. Again, reiterating the point that these are our decisions to make. And to help us make those decisions is a terrific development around the concept of palliative care. And these are clinicians that go back for specialized training, doctors, nurses, others, to learn about end-of-life issues, serious illness, in a way that focuses on the whole person. And when people are having the subspecialty care and treatments, they often lose sight of what the goals are for that family and that individual. And a palliative care consultation during serious illness can help you weigh the cost benefit of treatments and help you resolve conflicts between medications, and also make sure that you're thinking about what you really want towards the end, because ultimately we always get there. And that moves us towards hospice, which is a terrific service that has grown in the last 30 years here in our country. And it really is moving towards that end-of-life comfort care, giving us time, if we start early enough with hospice, to resolve the things we want to resolve in our life, or to enjoy what time we have left. They really specialize in keeping people comfortable, dealing with any pain or discomfort, helping the family come together where they can, spiritual support for all involved. And it often takes place in the home, whether that home is their private residence or assisted living or even long-term care. Hospice goes where it's needed. And sometimes there's hospice homes or hospice beds in a hospital, but by and large, it's a home-based service. And many people these days are having their last breaths well cared for in hospice. But some people are suffering in spite of all of that support. And they're looking for ways to hasten their death. And that's where we get to additional options like voluntary stopping eating and drinking, which is a recognized legal way to wind down one's life. You're not looking for a robust meal when you're basically on your last week or two of life. And to have medical support, and I think, and family support, that's critical to having a successful VSED experience by all accounts. Being medically supervised, it can keep some of the difficult aspects of stopping eating and drinking, which then resolve pretty quickly towards the end. And many people experience a pretty good passing within a week or two, sometimes a little bit longer, in an effort that can be very peaceful. There's also something called deep sedation or terminal sedation or palliative sedation. It has different names, where if you're having trouble breathing and you just can't catch that breath, or intractable pain, that a clinician, a physician, can decide to help ease that suffering by essentially sedating the patient. And the intention there is that of reducing the suffering, and therefore is even accepted and legal in all cases. And even the churches, the Catholic Church will say, no, that's relieving suffering, even though at times it will lead to hastening death. And it's, but the key to me is that that is physician initiated, not my choice, although I can ask for it. And that takes us to our new kid on the block, if you will, the one that we passed the law, medical aid in dying as an option here in New Mexico. Many of you may know it's been an option in other states, I think 10 others, going back 20 years in Oregon. And we named ours the Elizabeth Whitefield End of Life Options Act. Elizabeth Whitefield is a terrific, well-regarded, well-beloved family court judge in the Albuquerque area. She had a terrible cancer. She joined our advocacy effort early on. And in 2017, she testified in front of the legislature, many of whom she knew well. She'd look them in the eye with her trach and her oxygen on and her, tough delivery. And she'd ask for their support for this bill. We didn't get it passed in 2017. She died in the summer of 2018, and it was a tough death by all accounts. We weren't able to help Elizabeth have the death she was seeking with all the resources that we could bring to bear. But we knew right after that, when we were going back for 2019, that that's what we wanted to name our bill forevermore. And that's the basic description. A medical practice, we're in a healthcare provider, and I'm going to add to that a willing healthcare provider. Prescribes medication to a qualified individual who can self-administer that medication to bring about a peaceful death. Again, we went into effect in June 18th, and we've been working with it ever since. So just a little bit of detail, and again, it's all fleshed out on our website in a fair bit of detail, a lot of detail. Has to be an adult to make this request. Children, it's not something that children or a pediatric or a family, a parent can do for a child. It have to be 18 or older and a resident of New Mexico. The notion of resident, we kept fairly open. That's going to be up to the clinician to decide. So here are the 4 pillars of what it is to obtain medical aid in dying. You must have a terminal illness. I'll start with that. And that means it's incurable, irreversible condition with reasonable medical judgment result in death in 6 months or less. It's a key definition. It ties it to the hospice definition. You must have capacity, must be able to understand and appreciate the options and include and understand the risk benefits and to make and communicate an informed decision. Must be done voluntarily. That goes without saying. We're not going to tolerate any undue influence or duress. And you have to have the ability to self-administer. In other countries, they allow more for euthanasia and for putting these medications in an IV, when euthanasia means that it's done by the health professional. In our country, that's not the case. We're not there. This has to be self-administered. I'm going to move rapidly here through these requirements. Throughout the country, in the 10 states that have this, it's an MD or DO. Here in New Mexico, we expanded this to include an advanced practice nurse, a nurse practitioner, or a physician assistant, because they are so well accepted here in New Mexico, and they are primary providers in many places, particularly in our rural areas. But in all cases, the patient must be assessed by at least one MD or DO to determine the terminal diagnosis and capacity and the ability to self-administer. The mid-level provider can go ahead and write the prescription and do the rest of it, but we need that double assessment for those. And so this notion of capacity, just another mention of it. And once again, we opted to have a broad definition of who could take these referrals. If any of the clinicians involved have any inkling or concern that a patient may not have full capacity, they must refer, and that referral can go to any of these practitioners, and there will be no prescription written until that is documented in the patient's medical record that that consult was accomplished and that that clinician feels that the person does have the capacity to make this decision. So when prescribing aid in dying, the provider must inform the individual about all their options. They must document the qualifications. In the law, there's a very explicit request for medication to end my life in a peaceful manner form that must be completed and signed and witnessed. One of the two must be somebody who's not involved with the patient. It's a very explicit form. Again, you can go and read on it. It's on our website. We don't want there to be any surprises here. Again, everything is entered into the record, and we do have some reporting requirements to the Department of Health. The law has a number of other provisions, as you would expect. Right to know, we expect all clinicians, when they have patients with serious life-ending illness, to discuss all of the end-of-life options with them. That's not about medical aid in dying. That's about what you and I are discussing today. Importantly, our law says explicitly, medical aid in dying is not suicide. Suicide has its own challenges as language, as a concept. It has a lot of disparagement around it and embarrassment. This is not that. These are people who want to live but have limited life left and are making this choice. It also is an important definition because sometimes insurance policies and others will say that have an exception for suicide. There is no such exception. Made in dying does not compromise insurance or any other aspect of a person's life. We have liability protections for patients and families and providers as long as the law is followed. We have a strong conscience clause. It's important to know that nobody has to do this. No provider, no healthcare entity, certainly no patient. If they aren't going to provide it, then they need to refer either to another clinician or to an organization like ours. And they must inform the public if they're not going to participate on their website in a public way. So let me shift and just talk briefly about our organization that has been involved with advocacy for the last 5 years or more, really 8 years. We made a decision back in April that we were going to move forward and try and help not only implement the law, but also to do a good job with helping people understand what I've shared with you today about the advanced care planning, about the right to self-determination, about their end-of-life choices. So that's the mission that we've carving out for ourselves. Again, we're brand new at it. You know, we're just now 5 months old or something like that, and building our base for what we hope will be a sustainable future. On our new website, we have a very easy functioning donate button. If any of you are interested, we're looking for support so that we can be sustainable. So how's all this going here in New Mexico in the last 4 months? And it's a pleasure to share that I think overall progress is slow and steady in regards to this aid in dying. We've already had a number of what we call ingestions. You know, we could call them episodes. We're not sure about the language, but that seems to be the national language. We've had, again, more than a dozen, almost 2, maybe more, because we don't really know who all is using this new law. We only know what we learn about. But it's also not only in Albuquerque or Santa Fe. We've had reported uses of medical aid in dying in other parts of the state. We've had more and more clinicians getting involved with it, and that's encouraging to us. And so far, it has gone smoothly, and families have felt well served with the peaceful deaths that have resulted. I'm pleased to say that we've had several hospice agencies that have fully incorporating aid in dying as part of what they offer. And that really simplifies you know, the process, because we accept enrollment in hospice as evidence of 6-month prognosis. And therefore, it only takes one additional MD or DO to go ahead and do the rest of the assessment of a patient that requests. And some who aren't actually prescribing, other hospices organizations are providing support during the ingestions and assisting the families, and certainly what goes on afterwards with bereavement and the rest. We have other hospices that have opted out, and that's to be expected. This is not for everybody. And as long as they're posting that information so that people know what to expect, that's fine. That's what the law envisions. We've made some good progress with the larger healthcare systems in New Mexico. The Presbyterian Healthcare Services System, which has 7 or more hospitals throughout the state, they have created their systems and their policies, and they are open to providing this service. But right now, their clinicians, their docs are still getting educated about it. We've only had a few come forward so far that we know about. I think that will grow in time, but in general, the press system is supportive, as is UNM. We just learned a few days ago that UNM, after spending some time developing their policies, is now going to start supporting their patients for aid in dying when requested. I think eventually they will expand that and become a referral source, as they are for so many, but right now they're just working with their own patients, and we're pleased to have them joining the ranks there. I'm also pleased to say that every request that has come to our organization, our End of Life Options New Mexico, we've been able to help with a referral. Again, some of them have died before they could take their medications. Some of them have decided against taking their medications. All of that is expected. All of that is absolutely normal. But I think we're basically making pretty good progress. And our organization, we've again incorporated. Unlike NM New, we don't yet have our 501c3. We're waiting for ours, but we expect we'll get it soon. We have 4 subcommittees that are hard at work trying to build the foundation for our public outreach and clinical training and education that we'll be doing, plus the individual support and referrals that we're committed to providing with well-trained volunteers. This is not easy work. It's certainly not for everybody. And we want to do a good job with it the way other states have, that we're really standing on their shoulders, whether it's Oregon or California or Washington, Vermont, Colorado's had their law for years. So we want to make progress in a good, solid way.
Hey, Barak, this is just a time check.
You betcha. And I'm right there with you. So I just want to kind of end up with what you can do today. You know, I think it's important to give some direction there. So have that conversation, clarify your values and what matters to you as you think about what might be someday, and do it on a day when you're feeling good about yourself and feeling healthy. That'll get you the best answers. Create, or if you already have it, review that advanced directive, those end-of-life planning documents. If you're like most of us, you know, what you wrote a few years ago may no longer be in fact. Some people who you thought you could count on are no longer with us, or you're no longer with them. So revisit it. Appoint a surrogate who you trust and you know will represent you well. And this is really important. I'm just going to say this, even though you cannot include aid in dying in an advanced directive, because you have to have capacity right now. You can't predict this, nor can you delegate that decision to a surrogate or to a proxy. But it's important to speak about it with your loved ones and plan for these other options so that when the time and if the time comes, nobody will be shocked by the fact that you might want to stop eating and drinking or take advantage of our new law. You know, talk to people about this, and everybody gets better served. You'll be a better role model for the younger people in your family. So again, our resources, you know, if you can do a screenshot, do it. If not, maybe we could post that slide in the chat. But these are all excellent websites, and you can, they'll have more information on them than you'll ever want to see. And finally, we're ready for the Q&A right on time, I think. And I just want to thank you for being here and, you know, wish you well on the journey ahead. And so I'm going to stop sharing right now. And we can open it up a bit and, you know, see if we can invite a question or two.
Yep.
You know, that's a lot of information.
Yep. And I'll remind people, you can control what you see here. If you go up to the upper right corner of your view and you choose gallery, then you'll be able to see everybody. All right. So thank you, Barak. That was great information. So grateful for everyone that worked so hard on bringing aid in dying and the law in 2019. I know it took a village to get
really
that done
did.
over the years. So,
you know, let me also just mention, because I forgot to include it, that we had terrific, in addition to the advocacy, we had terrific champions. And I just want to shout out to Debbie Armstrong, representative from Albuquerque area, who had hoped to be on the call today, but had a doctor's appointment she couldn't miss. And also Senator Liz Stefanik's. They were tremendous in carrying this forward for 3 different sessions. The two of them were our champions and continue to be every day. So thanks for allowing me to do that.
Absolutely. All right. So it's Allison. I was seeing you put your hand up.
Thank you. I joined late because I was actually on a 4-hour presentation for the Santa Fe Estate Planning Council. One of the things that came up was this, and my question, Barak, would be about how to make sure people's plans are included in their planning that their attorneys are aware of. So maybe some guidelines, and then for me, what I could share with all the attorneys at the Estate Planning Council, because there's a disconnect. And there's also a big issue regarding capacity determination. And that was what this conference was this morning. So there is a question about somebody who's deemed cognitively incapacitated, who does need to administer themselves. However, they stated in their wishes that this is what they want. So there's a lot of question here, but what advice do you have for how somebody can make sure their wishes and this plan can be included in their estate plan?
Right. Well, a great question. And let's see what, there we go. Let's see what view comes up. We're all learning how this goes. Allison, good to see you. And one of the things that's going to help this situation is you have already proactively invited me and perhaps another person to participate. Perhaps I'll get our Rob Schwartz, our legal counsel, to be on that call. On that presentation. Unfortunately, it's not for a number of months that you've got me lined up to speak with that good group. Right. I think that's incredibly important, and it speaks to really how the challenge ahead and why our organization is basically trying to commit itself towards implementation. This is not something that many people know about. This is not something that is well understood. And whether it's clinicians that we need to not only have them understand it and get behind it, but also learn the skill set. It's also about estate planners. It's also about funeral homes. It's also about everybody else that does, this kind of work, and it gets asked these kinds of questions. So there is a lot of work to do. We have great resources. I think they're, again, on our website. It's going to take time. This is not something that gets used a lot, this medical aid in dying. After 20 years of access in Oregon, it's less than 1/4% that use this option, but it's there for those who are suffering. Nobody wants to rush out and take their own life. It's just, it's a last resort when people are suffering. But it's important because it allows us to have these discussions about these other terrific end-of-life options and the general awareness about how to have it come out the way you want it to come out. So that's really the best answer. I shared the
website on the call today with everyone who attended, so that I was pointing them to the resource for information. Right. So I look forward to watching this evolve, and very happy you're going to be doing a presentation for that group. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you always.
Yes, thank you. All right, so any other questions?
So Barak, what about those who are suffering but may not be qualified for the medical aid in dying? Can you talk a little bit more about what options they might have?
Sure.
Yeah, great question.
It's a really important one, because we're pleased to have this law. We're pleased that our New Mexico law is really very progressive compared to any of the other states that are out there. But there's still wide groups of people that are not going to be able to take advantage of this law and who are suffering mightily. What comes to mind are people who have early dementia or Alzheimer's, and they see what's coming down the road. And yet that has generally a very long period of development. And by the time they're going to have, towards the end of life and a 6-month prognosis, they are not going to have capacity to make these decisions. So I would say in general that kind of a dementia issue, that people who perhaps have other neurodegenerative diseases like ALS or even Parkinson's often have these very long times where they're suffering for years, but aren't really terminal. And, there are options. There's a lot of work being done right now on assisting people with dementia to do robust advanced directives to where they start to identify that food is actually a medication and that they ought to be able to say ahead of time that they don't want that medication. And if they are clear that they don't ever want to be force-fed, that they don't want to ever be offered food if they're not asking for it, that can lead towards the kind of transition to a voluntary stopping eating and drinking, essentially, that I spoke about before. So that's one approach. The other approach is for people who have the other kind of diseases that are very severe, with people are living lives that they didn't wish to live, but aren't terminal, that they can get clear with their loved ones and their clinicians that if they have a secondary condition, if they have some other things happen to them, perhaps a sepsis or a urinary tract infection that gets a little out of control, maybe they decide, I don't think I want to treat that. It's sort of like people saying after they've been on dialysis for 5 years, I've had enough. Let's have a calm, peaceful death here because I'm tired of doing this. So I think there are ways that other options that I mentioned so rapidly today can kick in and help people find out what's right for them and perhaps not suffer as long as what many people end up suffering. So thank you for the question.
Mm-hmm.
I know we're sort of running out of time, and I want to make sure, I want to look at, I still have slides and they look terrific, and I want to make sure we get all of them.
Yes, but we still have time for.
Excellent, thank you.
I have one question. You said to make sure, and you've mentioned it a couple times, make sure people and your family know what you want. So I've heard about the MOST form, and I think you mentioned it. Is that one of the best ways to make sure the people, that family and your friends around you, is that one of the best ways? I see it on certain people. I've been told, make sure it's on your refrigerator.
Well, what's it called, Paula?
It's called the MOST form.
Yeah,
I don't
that's
know.
A MOST form. It's lime green, and it's part of a national movement around the PULST. R stands for New Mexico Medical Orders for Scope of Treatment. And it really is less about informing the family, but certainly anything that'll help have the discussion with family, and this gets to that discussion, is good to use. But this is really between you and your clinician, your primary care provider, or your specialist. As you get a serious diagnosis that you maybe didn't have before, or you had it, but you hadn't dealt with it much, you want to sit with that clinician and go over this form, because this is a very clear statement that then, yes, you can post or have with you, that is an indication to anybody outside the hospital, particularly an EMS people at assisted living or long-term care, where they see this form, they know that this is a medical order. Because not only do you sign this as you do an advanced directive, but your clinician signs this, and it therefore has a weight to it, a medical authenticity to it, that then allows the EMS people or the nurse at the long-term care, or as you get to the emergency room, you know, I'm going to try and put mine right on my chest if I can, so that they know whether I do or do not want to be resuscitated. And in fact, this could actually help you not get to the hospital, because that's one of the choices on the most form. I should have actually put the most onto that page of resources, but it's a very simple website, nmmost.org, nmmost.org. They've got the form, they've got the explanation, but this is an out-of-hospital medical statement between you and your clinician about what you want, and the clinician signs off on that.
Yeah, great, great to know, and great to have that distinction between, because it's lime green, it does start a lot of conversations being on the refrigerator with family. So,
right. Other states it's pink or this or that, but the folks that put it together here in New Mexico, it was the good folks at Presbyterian Healthcare Services, and now it is statewide. They chose lime green just to be a little different. Larry, did I see you had a question?
Yes, thank you. You mentioned self-administration is a critical necessity. Aren't there individuals who can express their desire and can't swallow all that stuff or bring it to their mouth or whatever?
Yes. You know, again, our law, and I wish that Debbie Armstrong was here to answer it, because she takes a lot of pride, that the way we wrote our law is a little bit broader than other states. And yes, for people who have difficulty swallowing, we talk about ingest, and that means that through the digestive tract, not an IV, not into a vein. So if somebody has a feeding tube, or if they're anticipating this, they can have a feeding tube, the medications can be administered in a feeding tube. It can also be accomplished rectally. And I don't know exactly the particulars on that, but apparently that is not uncommon in other states and here in New Mexico so far, where people can express at the moment their free will and take an affirmative action to go ahead and start the medications. And that's what this is really about, an affirmative action by the individual at that moment to initiate that lethal medication. Swallowing is, of course, the most commonplace, and you know, apple juice is recommended, although we've heard tell that occasionally bourbon finds its way into that glass, that final sip, but it has to be taken down all at once for it to be maximally effective. And again, it's a well put together cocktail. The drug has to be compounded again, and the experts nationally keep improving it so that it is easier to take and more effective all the time. Good question, thank you.
Yep.
So Barak, why did it take so long for this law to get passed in New Mexico? What was the opposition to it?
Yeah, great question.
Yeah, it is. And again, we could have a long conversation about it, but you know, the quick of it is that, you know, there are absolutely, this is not for everybody. And there are some, due to their religious beliefs or their basic ethical principles, that just can't abide by the fact that, you know, somebody would want to take their life. And, you know, the Catholic Church is absolutely opposed to this. And they were, you know, they are not afraid of being political, as we well know in other domains. But the Catholic Church also, there are times when we stand side by side with him. Certainly I did when we were repealing the death penalty or trying to get early childhood education passed. They're a formidable advocacy and lobby group up in Santa Fe and across this country. And they spoke eloquently against this bill, saying that, you know, the sanctity of life and God's, you know, plans, and other more fundamental religious groups also have very strong feelings. And it got a little bit tough for some of those years. 2019, this bill got caught up in the abortion discussions. And there were billboards in New Mexico that said, you know, killing babies, killing grannies. And there was violence, you know, outside the home of, you know, some of our sponsors. So this raises a lot of passions around some very fundamental principles. And, you know, in the times being as challenging as they are, and fragmented in our political bodies, this is just another one that is difficult. But ultimately, it is about having the votes. These are political questions as much as they may be medical. But our bill is so balanced. Nobody has to do this. And it's fine for the church or anybody else to say, it's not part of my teaching. Well, our response was, you and your flock should not do this, and you needn't do it. But my flock has a different attitude towards it. That was the nature of the debate. And it was much less here in New Mexico than it was in many other states where they have tried for many years to pass this and haven't been successful. Ultimately, this past year, we were blessed to have the votes. We had done our homework, and you know, it'll stand here in New Mexico. I'm pretty confident of that.
All right. I think that's all. I think we should end it there unless there's anybody else with a quick question. Okay. So Barak, thank you so much for spending this time. We are just all starting to learn about this option, and really appreciate all your almost life work on getting this in place in New Mexico and now having a nonprofit to support it. So again, it's in the chat, the website for End of Life Options New Mexico. And thank you for all your good work.
You betcha. Thank you.
All right, so I want to introduce the second speaker, Mark Ballard. He, again, as I mentioned, he really found his calling as the Director of Advanced Planning for Funerals and Cremations, and he has served in that role for 10 years, for over 10 years. He arrived in New Mexico via the United States Air Force and got here in 1976, and he fell in love, as many of us do, with the land of enchantment. Mark is married and the father of 4 children and 7 grandchildren. He's a graduate of the University of Albuquerque with the BSBA in business and a minor in accounting and police science. And so, Mark, I would turn this over to you and invite you to share screen and show your slides.
Excellent. Thanks for the intro. Please, I want to really thank New Mexico New for allowing me to be part of this conference. This has been great. Barak, I really learned a lot from you. I really appreciate what you had to say and some of the words that you used, because a lot of what you were saying is going to resonate with what we're going to present today. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen right now, and you should all be able to see this. Oops.
Yep.
Is it on there? Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. I'm using a dual screen, so you know we can't have enough technology in our world today. So let's pull that up. Everybody see that now?
Yes, we see that, Mark.
Yes. So, oh, hang on, just 1 second here. It's not cooperating, but we'll take care of that right now. So I know that when you all got up this morning and you look at your agenda today, the first thing you were looking at was, oh, I can't believe that we're going to talk about death today and preparing for things and looking about how we're going to prepare our medical directives, and how excited everybody was when I got up this morning and said, I just can't wait to get all this information. Well, we all know it's not true. We all know we have some apprehension and reservations about it. And usually when it comes to this conversation, just like Barak talked about, was we need to not sit on this. We need to prepare for this. So I'm going to kind of lighten it up just real briefly here. We're going to do a little trivia. We're going to have a little fun here. So here I'm going to ask you real briefly here, who holds the record for the world's most expensive funeral? Is it A, Michael Jackson, B, Elvis Presley, C, Princess Diana, or John F. Kennedy? And you can use a chat room if you want. You can just keep it in the back of your mind. We're going to go through this kind of quickly here, and I'm sure a lot of you have some ideas. But I'm actually going to let you know now that, oops.
Hey, Mark, did you show that on the slide? Because we're still seeing the first slide, the peace of mind.
Huh.
And I could see everybody's starting to answer in the very good in the chat.
Huh. Let me start all over again. I apologize. I don't know what's going on with this. It was going really well. Let's see. Let me close out real quickly here and start over again. I apologize for that. Okay.
No problem.
You bet.
I knew you had a great slide for that. So
I know I did. Apologize there. So 1 second here. I don't like waiting all this time and realizing that it wasn't there. Why is it not showing? Oh, there we go. I just want to show everybody my screen, you know, my desktops. There we go. Let's try this again now. Switch over. View. Does everybody see that now?
No.
No.
What is going on here? Hang on one second. All right. Why is it not showing up on my screen?
There you go.
There we go. We got it now?
There you go.
Yes. I
Yes.
apologize, everybody.
First slide.
Yeah. Let's see.
And that'll progress. Yep.
Okay. So as we asked before, and I apologize for delays, we're going to actually go through the answers here, and I'm going to go back to this. It was actually Princess Diana. Princess Diana's funeral cost over $16 million to do. And right after the funeral was done, the Queen came out with a directive to the entire office and to the entire family that if you don't have a pre-plan done, you are out of the will, because we're not going to go through this again. So here's another one. What celebrity at their funeral had tickets scalped for more than $10,000? Was it A, Michael Jackson? Was it B, Elvis Presley? Was it Prince, or was it John Lennon? Give you just a second there. And our answer actually is Michael Jackson. Wasn't the classicest move, but over 17,000 people attended, and there were performances by Stevie Wonder, Mariah Carey, and even Usher. So here's the last one we're going to go to. Who owns the plot next to Marilyn Monroe? Is it A, Joe DiMaggio? Is it B, Madonna? C, Hugh Hefner? Or D, John F. Kennedy? I kind of give you all just a little bit there. Actually, the answer is, right, C, Hugh Hefner. Hugh Hefner purchased the plot in California, right, for $75,000. And many people are kind of surprised by the answer, because some of us will remember that Marilyn had relations with both Joe and John. So, and for the last one here, we're going to talk about for veterans. And if you're a veteran here watching us, I want to thank you for your service. But how many stars should be visible on a properly folded flag? And I'll give you a hint. It's between 1 and 6. So the answer is 4 stars, 1 for each branch. The only exception, the Coast Guard got left out, but it is for the Army, the Air Force, Navy, and Marines, but 4 stars on the flag. So our agenda today is going to talk about, obviously, you know, a funeral home and what my story is, which we're going to get into a little bit. We did a little trivia, as we saw. We're going to talk about the Final Wishes Organizer, which is a great place for you to document your wishes and to, oh, that's kind of weird. And to put your interests of what you want to do, plan in place for your loved ones. We're going to talk about the common reasons. Why do families plan in advance? We're going to talk a little bit about the acute loss period, which is a universal process that we all go through when we lose a loved one. We're going to talk about the 5 key points to a funeral and what information you need to know. And we're also going to talk about, by scheduling your appointment, you can customize the plan that you want and leave no unanswered questions to your family when the time comes. So when there is a death that occurs, there are over 100 things that has to be done. This is a very intimidating slide. It can be sometimes, but you can see there's so much stuff on here. It would take an eternity to go through it all. But when you pre-plan, you take care of 75 to 80% of that before the death occurs. So the benefits of pre-planning are unanimous to get it done. But when you can just think about a family having to sit down with a funeral director and get all this done and not have anything pre-planned ahead of time, it can be extremely overwhelming during a very difficult time. The Final Wishes Organizer, which is a plan that we give out to all of our families, it'll talk about your vital statistics. It'll also provide information if you have a military record. It will go into some special instructions where you can assist your family with certain details that you want to put on paper. It's sort of like what we talked about earlier in the presentation. You want to put things down on paper to let families know about what's going on. Having a conversation at a table doesn't suffice. You want it written down, taken care of. It also lists your emergency contacts. Who are you going to contact when the death occurs? Because that can be really difficult to do. And then also what your requests are. You'll leave no question as to what your final wishes are. And so when we talked about before was the common reasons, you're actually going to discuss about the decisions that would burden a family later on. I mean, what are some of the things you're going to have to think about? You're going to decide what kind of casket you want. You're going to decide what kind of color urn you want. You're going to decide whether service here or service maybe here or celebration of life. You're going to be able to provide peace of mind to you and your family because you're going to be taking care of that ahead of time. We hope you will. You'll leave no doubts as to what kind of funeral or final disposition that you want. And you're also going to be able to ensure that your funeral costs have been addressed ahead of time. And you'll eliminate what we talk about as emotional overspending. That's where someone walks in and gets really upset and goes, oh, I should have seen Dad a long time ago. I feel really bad. I haven't visited him. We're not going to do the $2,000 casket. We're going to spend money and do a $5,000 casket, $5,000. So they spend out of emotional grief. And you also will allow your loved ones to have a really positive grieving experience. And I know it's kind of hard to hear that, but you really can really make it a very positive experience by planning ahead of time. So I'm going to actually take you back just a little bit. Who remembers when the New York skyline used to look like this? Well, what happened on September 11th was a life-altering event for everyone. And I'm going to walk you through briefly the experience and the universal process that we went through as a nation. Do you all remember where you were when you heard the news? We all remember this slide. We'll never forget that, you know, and all of you are going back right now in your mind going, I do remember that day. I can tell you exactly what was going on. Do you remember when you called and when you talked to someone, when you heard the news, who you shared it with, and when you pick up the phone? Was there anyone here who did not turn on the TV to see what was unfolding? Why do you think we felt the need to turn the TV on to see it? If you were like me, we gathered in our homes with those that we love to feel safe as we watched the president address us from the home at the White House. And, excuse me, people connected to support each other through the painful weeks and years ahead. And as a nation and individually, we reflected on what had happened and how it would change us. Church attendance skyrocketed as people searched for meaning and hope. And many people even joined the military, police force, or even became firefighters. And when the death settled, we did not forget what occurred on that day. We celebrated the lives of those that were lost. On the day of your death, your family will go through a similar but deeply personal experience with loss. For the first time in their lives, you won't be just a phone call away. So we'd like to talk to our families. What we teach about our families is about the time between the event of death and the onset of grief, and it's called the acute loss period. So we just talked about the slides and what we all went through as a nation when 9/11 occurred. And I'm going to use my mouse here just a little bit. You see the first three stages here, hearing, sharing, and seeing? We showed those slides. You remember when you heard the news? You remember who you shared the news with? You remember who you had to see it on TV to see if it was real? And you'll notice that this aligns with your emotional needs right here on the side. And then we had to gather as a nation. Remember, we connected with others to get through what we were going through. And those are our relational needs. And lastly, we had the reflecting and the celebrating where it addressed our spiritual needs. When you complete all 7 phases here, you do start to begin healing. And the thing to remember about pre-planning is that these first 3 steps, they will happen automatically. But the only way these other 4 stages happen is when you put an intentional plan in place. So here's a little study that was done in 1970. And it talks about the funeral prices over the years. Now, this isn't a pre-plan. This is actually similar to, the funeral home, which includes the casket, the vault, a cemetery space, the opening and closing, which is when you open up the grave and you bury it back up, the grave and the marker. And you can see on this slide that there's nothing going down. Everything has gone up. Typically, funeral costs double every 7 to 10 years. And I know this for a fact. This study is actually spot on. I get calls from families that call me up and say, I need to look at my mom's funeral that she did 20 years ago. And I'll pick up the plan. And it might be a simple cremation with a service. And it might be about $3,200. And I will tell them, you know what? Your mom was a really smart lady by getting that done, because I'll tell you why it's so important to pre-plan. So there's 5 key points to a funeral pre-plan policy. Number 1, you get to lock in the costs. Everything the funeral home provides to you is guaranteed. So you don't pay any escalating prices. It protects you from inflation. So anything the funeral home provides is locked in on the cost on the day you start to fund it. Whether you pay it right away, whether you pay it over years, your costs will not go up. So for example, if you have to pick out a $2,500 casket and it goes up to $5,000 by the time you pass away, you pay no difference. Your costs are locked in. So this is a huge financial savings. Your funds are protected by an insurance provider. New Mexico has a regulation they adopted in the mid-1980s that is a very good regulation. And we should be very proud that we found this and we did this. Because in 1980, mid-1980s, there was a funeral home there that did have pre-planned money and they went bankrupt. And those families that had pre-planned policies lost all their policies. So New Mexico has a regulation that any funeral home you go to in the state of New Mexico, if you go in and want to do a pre-plan, they must show an insurance underwriter that will protect those funds should something happen to the funeral home. So those funds are yours. The funeral home only performs the services. So you are the owner of the policy. So you want to know who that insurance company is. It's also transferable. Let's say you want to move to Saratoga in Florida and you want to be on the beach and have a condo, enjoy the water, and you want to move. It's totally transferable. All you do is contact a funeral home there. You let them know you have a funeral plan in New Mexico and you'd like to transfer the policy. The funds will be transferred to that funeral home down there. You may have to pay a difference in taxes or some small state items, but the majority of the fund, all the funds will be transferred, but you might be a little bit of difference in cost, but it is your policy and you can transfer it. You also can have manageable payments. You can either pay it all at once, you can pay it over time, and there are some benefits to that as well. You also have protection during that period that you're making payments, because in a multi-plan policy, once you get past the first 2 years, if you should happen to pass away on, let's say, a 5-year policy, the policy will absolutely pay everything off. You owe no back payments, no back penalty at all. You can also pay it off early at any time. So many of us who are on fixed incomes, it's really hard to absorb a cost of a funeral plan. Well, you can do a funeral payment policy for a few months and pay it off at any time. There's no prepayment penalties. And all you have to do is call up and say, what is my payoff? So one of the things that many funeral homes include in their policies is what we call out-of-area protection. And what that means is that 70 to 75 miles from your place of residence, anywhere in the world, if something should happen to you and you pass away, you want to know how you're going to get back. You want to know how you're going to get back home. And what are the worries that your families are going to have? Well, many funeral homes include this out-of-area protection plan with their policies, and they range anywhere from $499 to $600, depending on the funeral home you go to. But this is a good thing to have, because many of us, whether we go to a Mayo Clinic for treatment, whether we visit Johnny in Colorado because we want to see the grandkids, this protects you should something happen to you. And all it is a simple phone call. Oh, by the way, Mark just passed away. Where are you at? Well, I'm actually in Japan on a trip. Okay, you know what? We'll contact the funeral home there and we'll prepare Mark to bring him back to Albuquerque. It's that simple. Here are some commonly asked questions over the next few slides that many of you, I'm sure you have. So what if you already have insurance? Well, we always tell people that insurance is for the living, because it's somewhat similar to the statistic that was mentioned earlier. 70 to 75% of all deaths will occur in a hospital, hospice facility, or a nursing home. And at the time of death, there's going to be expenses from the facility, possibly even credit cards, etc., which is what your existing life insurance policies or insurance policies you should use for. Because life insurance policies, as I mentioned before, are for the living. If the thought is to use the insurance for the funeral home, some funeral homes do that. But I will tell you that funeral homes will use a third party to extrapolate those funds from the insurance policy. And they're going to charge you anywhere between 5 to 6%, or even up as much as 8% of that funeral amount to do that practice to pull those funds out. That money should be to your family. They should be charging you that. But that's what funeral homes do, because they're going to be expected to pay time of death. So, and I will tell you now, most insurance companies are required a death certificate right away. And in the state of Mexico, you're not going to get a death certificate for maybe 7 to 10 days. During COVID, that was quite a long time, but that's all caught up now. Everything's already back up and caught up. And one of the things also, as I mentioned, is that they will only deal with funeral family members when it comes to funeral insurance companies. So they're going through a loss and they're telling you, well, what was the reason why Mark passed away? I don't know. He died. I don't know what's going on. I have a lot going on. They're only going to deal with family members. They're not going to deal with the funeral home. So by having a pre-planned policy, you remove all of that. One of the things we talked about when a pre-planned policy versus other insurance is that in most funeral pre-planned policies, 99% of the people deem it irrevocable. What that means is that you can't cash it out, you can't borrow on it. It's actually set aside for your funeral pre-plan. And one of the good things about that is that when you go on a Medicaid spend down, which happens a lot, mom's going on Medicaid, they'll tell you, hey, you know what? We need to liquidate our assets. You can't have more than $2,000 a month. You need to get rid of all these other insurance policies. You need to get rid of your cash. Oh, what is this? Well, it's a pre-plan with the state, with the funeral home in New Mexico. Well, it's deemed irrevocable. We can't touch that. So it protects you from Medicaid spend down, which is the only insurance policy you can do that with. So it's a really good thing. Now, many of us have probably seen those commercials on Sunday morning when you're having coffee, or even like late Saturday afternoon, where the movie star gets up and goes, you can get a $50,000 burial expense policy for as little as $21 a month. Automatic renewals, no health requirements whatsoever, and just give us a call today. Those are just another version of term or whole life insurance. It's not a funeral pre-plan. They don't guarantee your costs. When it comes to the time of death, you're going to have to give them a death certificate. The funeral home is going to want to be paid on the time of death. So you're out of pocket until you get the death certificate to get reimbursed from that funeral pre-plan policy, funeral burial expense policy. So unless it's assigned to a funeral home, it is not a funeral pre-plan. And we talked about OAP and how it's transferable. So that's, we already went through that. So here's another one that comes up. Is cremation cheaper than burial? I can tell you that overall in New Mexico, about 78% of the people choose cremation over burial. And it's getting higher because it's a little more sometimes financially economical. A lot of people are in different states and not at the family plots anymore. And what really matters is what you want for your funeral pre-plan. I've seen some cremation policies be more than a burial. It just depends on what the family wants, or the person having the pre-plan chooses to put into their policy. However, if you're concerned about, I'm not sure if I want to be cremated or buried, or I'm really tossed with it, all it requires is a conversation with a trained professional. You just need to have a conversation with someone who does this all the time. And it never fails. After about 15 to 20 minutes, all of a sudden they go, you know what? I really like that casket, that wooden casket. Oh, so you want to be buried. We just don't have the conversation. We talk about it for a little bit and we dismiss it. As I mentioned before, dying and death is the last thing we talk about. So do all funeral homes have their own crematory? You need to ask that question because not all funeral homes have their own crematory. Ours is down at Sunset Memorial Park at Manal on the freeway. But that's where you hear some of those stories about someone getting the wrong ashes or something happened, because basically they weren't in their care the entire time. They were using another funeral home to perform that cremation. So you need to ask that question. Who can get a pre-planned policy? Anybody can, at any age. I've seen them as young as 6 years old. Woman came in and got them for her grandkids. She wanted it all done because she'd been through a funeral situation. She goes, I don't want my family to have to go through this, and I'm going to protect them from that. What if you want to donate your body to science? Donating your body to science used to be a really big thing, and it still pretty well is, but not as much anymore for several reasons. One is, now they have electronic cadavers. They mimic things for doctors. There's less issues with communicable diseases between interns and people training to be doctors. There isn't much of a need for the parts as we thought before. And I'll tell you, with COVID, they didn't do any body donations whatsoever, and they still haven't. And when you do a donation of body to science, you have to put in an application. You have to be tested. And then we can't control what happens when you die. We can't control what happens while you're living and you want to have your body donated to science. Did you go on cancer drugs? Because then they won't take you. We don't know how you're going to pass away, or if you were in a car accident, or if the need of your organs are in demand at the time of death. So what we tell people is go ahead and go through that process if you want to do it, but have a plan B. And what I mean by plan B is, what if they don't take you at the time of death? Do you have a funeral pre-planned policy? So that's something you want to put in place and have it there. If they should happen to take you at the time of death, I can't speak for other funeral homes. So all we do is work with the family in preparing the body for the service after we donate, the donation is done. But we also reimburse any charges back to the family that they don't use. So at least you have it in place. Because can you imagine if you had a loved one and all of a sudden they walk in and they go, I know Mark wanted to be donated to science, but we can't use him right now. So you're going to have to figure out what to do with Mark now, which is really hard to do on the time of death. But I would think my wife would be kind of grieving a little bit, So, but also, can my family scatter ashes? We know people do it. It is illegal. I can tell you now, but people do it. But we ask people, find a reputable place to do it. Find an ossuary or a common place for you to be able to disperse those ashes. Or if you go up to the forest, go ahead and find out what areas are used for dispersal of ashes, because it's extremely caustic. So it will kill life out there in the lands and all. So we need to be careful of that. But you remember that when you scatter ashes or what you do with it, have some type of memorialization of permanency. And I'm going to give you a quick little scenario. I passed away and my grandson says to my wife, where's Poppy's ashes? And by the way, I'm having 8 grandkids, which I just found out last week. So I'm happy about that. So all of a sudden he says, well, Poppy liked golf all the time. And we sprinkled his ashes on the #1 green at Arroyo del Oso. Where's that? Well, that Lomas there in Osuna, but there's a shopping center there now. Well, there used to be a golf course there. He doesn't make that connection. But if I had a little stone or a little plaque, which is very affordable and has my name on it at like Sunset Memorial Park, and I still have my ashes scattered on the #1 green, he's going to make that connection to his ancestry and legacy. So it's there. So that's something to consider for a little small donation, because a lot of families come in and go, hey, by the way, where are my mom's ashes? I don't know where they're at. Your dad took them. We don't know what he did with them. So understand what happens there when you have some type of permanency or memorialization. You need to ask, what are my veterans benefits for veterans? And will you give the veteran benefits to the spouse? Because I can't speak for other funeral homes, but we believe the spouse served just like the veteran. So ask those questions. Are some funeral homes cheaper than others? I will tell you now, we've been doing this a long time. We know what Bill is doing down the end of the block. We know what Mary is doing up in the Heights. Everyone knows what everybody's charges are. So what may look like it's cheaper sometimes may not be there, because the billboard may not reveal all the charges that are there. But the best thing I can tell you is to talk to a reputable consultant that can help you compare apples to apples, who will actually look at an estimate from one funeral home compared to another funeral home, excuse me. And I can only speak for ours, because we get people that come in sometimes. I don't get it. Well, you said you wanted a service. Yeah, I did. It's not on the contract. No, I told them it's not on the contract. So we got to be careful of that. And on the very bottom, it says, will the funeral homes help my family after I'm gone? You know, it's really important that we tell people 90% of what a funeral home does is for the living. It's not for the dying. We want to take care of the families after someone's passed away. We want to help them get through estate planning. We want to help them, you know, be able to settle the social media accounts. We want to tell them where to go to get a lawyer if they need to get one. We want to tell them where they can find resources to help them with the estate. We want to check with them to see how they're doing. We want to ask them, have you taken advantage? At French, we have free grief counseling for our families, up to 3 visits. And you'll actually find out more about Dr. Mikel Rivera on October 29th with New Mexico News. So if you haven't registered, register for that and you'll find out more about that. But ask your funeral home, what will you do for my family after I'm gone? So what are the next steps and the final steps here? One is we need to get you your final wishes organized, which you can have. It's free of charge. There's no fee at all involved. What it really is it lists all the things we talked about. And sometimes we used to send these out to people, and I'm going to tell you what happens. They get it in the mail, they open it up, and they go, I can't deal with this right now. I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to put it aside. And you know what happens? Month goes by, 6 months go by, years go by. The wife sits down with the husband one day, and by the way, women are very good at this. Men are not good at this. And she'll sit there and go, did you get the pre-planned information done? I don't want to talk about it. I'm not going to deal with that right now. And it goes on. And many of us know we've had someone in our life who someone has passed away suddenly. We don't know when that time is going to happen. It's like I said earlier, you can't predict death. And when I tell people you should pre-plan, they always say, sometimes, I'm not ready for you just yet. And I always say, do you know when that is? Because you don't know. You want to plan ahead and get it done. Because you know what happens when you pre-plan, you get it all done? We get families that say, what do I do now? We say, enjoy life. It's all done. Come on, it's all good. And they'll cover funding options. So how you can do that is just get in touch with New Mexico New. You'll have some contact information from me. This is a free consultation. And if you ever feel like you're in front of a consultant from a funeral home and you feel like you're being sold, it's okay to walk away. You shouldn't feel that way, because it should be about education on your options, and you choose the options you want. But if you ask them what do you recommend, they're going to give you recommendations, but don't ever feel you're being pressured, because you shouldn't. And I want to say, please schedule your appointment, set things up, get it done, because here's the thing, it's a universal yes from everyone. You've been thinking about this for a really long time. It's time to put it in action. And you know what? Putting it in action doesn't hurt, and talking about it doesn't make it happen. So thank you, New Mexico New. Thank you, everybody, for letting me have the opportunity to be here today. I love being part of this group, and I wish you all a wonderful and blessed day.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, thank you so much. Congratulations on your 8th grandchild. Now we'll change it. Yes. And I appreciate your comment about if you feel like you're being sold, walk away. It's okay to walk away. I really appreciate that, because these are important conversations. So, yes.
Absolutely.
All right. So we're going to open up for Q&A. And I'll go to gallery mode again. If you want to go to gallery mode, you can go up to the right-hand corner and push the view. And you would have some. So,
Allison had a question in the chat.
Yeah. Mark, I was wondering about how are different religious rituals handled by funeral homes? And
they should be well versed on that. It's a great question. They should know about what the Jewish tradition is. They should know about Native Americans, which we don't get a lot of Native Americans, but you should be well versed in that. Whether it's Hindu, we do a lot of Hindu services, so we want to make sure that we follow the rituals and respect what they want to do, which is an amazing experience to watch. I'll tell you that now. But if a funeral home is not versed in what your ritual is, that's usually a clue. I would walk away and say, because even with funeral directors and pre-planning consultants, between the funeral home itself and employees, you should have someone on site that really knows what has to happen and how we can train that. So
thank you.
You bet. Great question.
Thanks.
Well, I'll ask if I've done a pre-planning, and so I just wanted to, I think you touched on this, but if I had pre-planning done years ago, at either another place in Albuquerque or another state, then I should be able to come to French and still have that same conversation. And
yeah, we never turn a family away when we say, well, you want to look at your funeral home policy? They can always review and your policy at any time. And I will tell you, to go back to the question I mentioned about the Mexico regulation, one of the good things about that too is that in other states like Colorado, I'll tell you, for example, and a few others, they run what they call trust business and insurance business. And insurance business, they'll put some of the policies on, and trust means they have to maintain their bank of revenue to cover those policies. But when you have a trust involved to cover the policies, by FTC regulations, you have to show that you have that much money in the bank should all those policies come to fruition in one day. And funeral homes that have trust business can charge you for reviewing a policy. They can charge you for changing your policy. They can charge you for moving your policy. So having a state regulation is a great thing that we have in New Mexico. And you can transfer a policy from one funeral home to another, but you'll never hear from if a consultant ever says, I was going to meet with somebody who had a policy from X funeral home and I didn't want to meet with them. That wouldn't happen here. We meet with all families who want to meet with us. So they should be able to meet with you. And that's another clue if they don't want to. So okay. I hope that answers your question, Paul.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Sure.
All right. So I think we're at time. I appreciate, again, Mark, I appreciate the information, and hopefully it was useful. I also appreciate the reminder that it is, that we never know when that day is, and it's on that to-do list. And been there for a while, and so it
always is on it. It's the last thing they'll talk about. And then when they walk in, they go, I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I laugh at them. I go, I've never heard that before, because we all want to plan our death, right? No, that's the last thing. We always want to do that,
That's right, and when it is.
But thank you.
Yep, thank you. All right, so if we can get up the slides for the last part, I just want to say thank you, everybody, for joining.